The State Department has released a new plan to ensure the nearly $18 billion in military aid America has sent to Ukraine doesn't end up in Russian hands. Elias Yousif is a research analyst with the Stimson Center's Conventional Defense Program. Elias, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Does the U.S. not have a way to track American weapons that are either sold or donated to foreign countries?
Well, the United States does have a conventional program for tracking arms once they've been delivered to a foreign country. It's known as end-use monitoring, and it's meant to ensure that weapons are appropriately inventoried, stockpiled, and accounted for. But those programs are designed to work in peacetime when we can have officials visiting warehouses and depots, checking serial numbers. It just doesn't work in the context of Ukraine where there are active hostilities going on.
So what does the State Department's plan add to that oversight?
Right. Well, the plan is essentially broken down into three parts. One, it's meant to bolster the ability of Ukrainians and their neighbors to account for those systems, to catalog them, to inventory them. The second bit is just to increase the robustness of border security and border management systems, customs and the like. And then the final bit is to enhance the ability of Ukrainian and neighboring law enforcement to detect, track, understand, and interdict potential illicit weapons flows.
So is there any evidence that illegal weapons diversion has already happened in Ukraine?
For the most part, no. I think the assessment generally is that the intensity of the fighting and the demands of the front lines have kept most of those weapons in service, and there just isn't the incentive structure yet to see those weapons diverted. Now, that said, as the conflict changes, that dynamic may also change.
You know, there aren't any American troops, obviously, on the ground in Ukraine. How could we really know for sure what's happening with those weapons?
Well, the answer is it's very difficult. At some stage, the hope would be that you have some officials who are able to actually inventory, catalog, do those serial number checks. But for the short term, we really are depending on the Ukrainians and their commitment to keep these weapons in the right hands.
And we should note that it's not just the Russians that could get those weapons, but arms dealers could take them just to sell them.
Yeah, absolutely. We are certainly concerned that these arms, given the scale and scope of the transfers, as you said, nearly $18 billion, even a little bit of leakage into the black market can be a really enduring security threat for the region and beyond.
And hasn't that happened in other conflicts?
Certainly. I think the U.S. has an unfortunate history of engaging in these very large military assistance efforts, only to find that those weapons end up in the wrong hands. You need to look no further than Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and elsewhere, where the U.S. has transferred arms and found that their adversaries end up having them.
You know, one criticism of the State Department's plan is that it doesn't address small arms. Does that make a difference, and why doesn't it address those arms?
Well, for me, that's actually a really important point. We understand why there is a focus on these man-pads and man-portable air defense systems and anti-armor systems, but for me, small arms are often what is easiest to transport, easiest to smuggle, easiest to use, and poses a real threat to civilians and to criminal organizations all over the world.
So what's your overall assessment of the State Department's plan and their strategy for this issue?
Well, I think it's very promising. It's a good first step. I'm very glad to see that they've taken some of the concerns that have been raised by people like myself on this issue. I hope the State Department is willing to adapt and change its plan based on changing conflict dynamics, diversion indicators, and be able to be reflexive to what's happening on the ground. And as you said, I really do hope that some of this tends to focus on small arms because those can be especially dangerous.
Do you think that the U.S. will be able to stop illegal weapons diversion in the future? I mean, or is this really an impossible task?
Well, you know, arms diversion is always a risk, even under the best of circumstances, and Ukraine clearly isn't in the best of circumstances. I think what matters is putting in place the most robust possible mitigation measures so that we are really trying to undercut the harm that could come from this military assistance effort.
So, Elias, once weapons are stolen or they end up in the wrong hands, is there anything the U.S. can do to recover those weapons?
It's really difficult. Once they end up in the wrong hands, recovery becomes increasingly difficult, especially if they proliferate to other geographies. And so the important steps should be taken ahead of time before those weapons reach the black market, including end-use monitoring and interdiction measures.
And, you know, we've been talking about securing American weapons, but what about weapons that are delivered by our allies? Do they have those safeguards in place to monitor their weapons? Because we certainly don't want them getting into the wrong hands either.
Absolutely. The EU in particular is working on a plan that's meant to be similar or akin to the one that the United States has produced. The hope, of course, is that these plans are coordinating with one another, that the U.S. government is coordinating with the Defense Contact Group and its allies to ensure that those measures are all integrated.
And, you know, we've been talking about this possibility. When it does happen, and it has happened, of those weapons getting into the wrong hands, what's the impact? What do you see, especially on the civilian base?
Oh, it can be really harmful, whether that means criminal organizations being able to operate more freely, sub-state armed groups being able to improve their operations, become more powerful, or terror activity. I mean, there's a history of things like man-pads being used to target commercial airliners. So the risks to stability, security, and civilian harm can be quite severe.
And we saw, you know, just briefly in Afghanistan, once U.S. troops left, we saw what happens when American weapons get into the wrong hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was probably one of the most severe cases of mass diversion in recent memory, and really indicates the level of risk that we take, even with the best of intentions, when we transfer arms.
Well, Elias, I appreciate you coming in and your work on this subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.